Welcome to the Psychology Talk podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Scott Hoy. The Psychology Talk podcast is a unique conversation about psychology from around the globe. We bring you ideas from mental health practitioners and experts to keep you informed about the latest issues and trends. Topics include developments and research in psychotherapy and social sciences, hypnosis and mind-body treatments, meditation and spirituality, and new treatment modalities. And while you're listening, please take a moment to subscribe and give us a review at your favorite streaming site. It helps us to grow and further reach people with quality programming. And now, here's the episode. Hello, everyone, and welcome. Today, my guest is Dr. Thomas R. Verny. Dr. Verny is a psychiatrist, writer, and academic. He has previously taught at Harvard University, the University of Toronto, York University in Toronto, St. Mary's University in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and the Santa Barbara Graduate Institute. In addition to being the author of 8 books, Dr. Verny is the author or co-author of 47 scientific papers and articles. He has participated in more than 250 newspaper, radio, and TV interviews, including appearances with Phil Donahue, Merv Griffin, Oprah Winfrey, Sally Jesse Raphael, and Barbara Walters. Today, he will be discussing his new book, The Embodied Mind, Understanding the Mysteries of Cellular Memory, Consciousness, and Our Bodies. Dr. Verny, welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, it's an honor and a pleasure to have you here. Now, I really enjoyed the book. I found it to be a really comprehensive overview and synthesis of a lot of groundbreaking research and expanding a lot on what we know about the body and the mind and cellular memory and many other things. It really expands the perspective of just what mind and memory is in humans and other biological creatures.
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Well, maybe as a kind of introduction to the listeners who have not read the book, maybe we can kind of dive into some of these ideas and what drove you to write this book?
Sure. Thank you, Scott, for that lovely introduction. Well, as you probably know, some years ago, I wrote The Secret Life of the Unborn Child. And that was a big book. It has been published now in 27 countries. And what it deals with essentially is the fact that for a long time we have underestimated the mental abilities of unborn and newborn children. And so in that book, The Secret Life of the Unborn Child, I was showing that children can be scientifically proven that children can remember things that happened to them at the end of the second trimester. In other words, 6 months after conception. So from that on, we have very good solid neurological evidence that children can lay down some primitive memories. Okay? But then as I was writing that particular book and continued to lecture on the subject and be exposed to many other scientists, I came to see that there were people who had memories going back prior to the second trimester. I see you react.
Yeah. Well, no, I'm aware of things that come up in psychiatry and psychotherapy, especially psychotherapy, spontaneous regressions to memories. And you note some in your book, of course, but also like the work of Stanislav Grof, where he talks about natal and prenatal, whatever that means, memories or experiences that the mind has in its storehouse.
Yes. I knew Stan Grof, and I have worked with him, have great respect for him. But anyway, coming back then, so the question always was for me, okay, I can prove scientifically that these memories are valid. But how do I explain memories going back further? And so that always kind of bothered me because I was very much involved over the years in pre- and perinatal psychology, meaning the psychology of children before birth and around the time of birth. And so about 7 years ago, I read this article in a scientific journal. I forgot where it was, about a 44-year-old man in France who went to see a physician because of weakness in his left leg. And so the physician did all kinds of tests and also did an X-ray of his head. And to his great astonishment, discovered that the man had virtually no brain. There was only a very thin kind of a crescent of brain tissue, and the rest was just cerebrospinal fluid. In medical practice, as you know, that's called hydrocephalus. So the man had about 85 to 90% of his brain missing. He was a 44-year-old married man with 2 children and employed as a civil servant in France. So when I read that, I thought, how is this possible? How can a person without a brain, or virtually no brain at all, act so normally? And so that was kind of the initial impetus to my wanting to find out, what is going on here. And so, quite to my further surprise, I discovered that actually there was quite a bit in the literature about children, for example, who had who had all kinds of brain diseases, having part of their brains removed, and they continued to act and behave and think totally normally. The same thing with adults, less frequently, but also when brain removal was done, these people continued, most of them, to act normally. So that's when I started on my journey. I read about 5,000 books and papers in preparation for this book, The Embodied Mind. And so gradually I collected sufficient evidence to show that the body, the cells and the tissues and the organs in our bodies act as kind of a backup system, just like your computer, for example, is backed up to the cloud, or perhaps it has a backup disk. So it seems to me that the body does the same thing, so that the brain does not act on its own. Even when you have a perfectly fine brain, the body is still there supporting the brain. And so my book deals with various ways of proving that point. And so what I'm really saying in the book, I'm not putting down the brain. The brain is important, of course.
Okay.
But, I think that what has happened is, if you look at our history as a society, you can realize that we have had this kind of centuries old, as far back as history takes us, we have been a patriarchal society. In a patriarchal society, everything is hierarchical. And everything flows from the head down. So you have the head of the family, the head of the tribe, the head of the hospital. You work at psychology today, I believe. So there's probably a head administrator, there's somebody who is a head or the head of the department. It's all about the head. And so what I think that has also happened to science is that science also has kind of fallen into the same model, if you like, so that everything is hierarchical, and there has been this extreme emphasis on the head as opposed to the body.
Well, I think so. But I mean, if you go back historically, I don't think the Greeks put all that much of an emphasis on the head, right?
Well, I don't know. It's hard to, they were into sports, so to speak. They were into their bodies a lot.
Yes, they were.
in all kinds of different ways. But still, as a science, they were very materialistic. I mean, it was the Greeks who came up with the idea of atoms, which is brilliant, absolutely brilliant. And if I remember reading some of the scientists from the Greek era, they proposed that the atom, that if you cut a watermelon into smaller and smaller and smaller pieces, I think that's how it was written originally. If you cut it into smaller and smaller pieces, finally you come to a point where you cannot cut it any smaller. That's what they call the atom. Okay, so in a sense, we have also inherited that kind of a materialistic outlook on science. And materialism then led to determinism. So that when you read neuroscience today, the way the mind and consciousness are described very popularly, they love that term epiphenomenon. In other words, what that means is it's like epigenetics. It is a function of the brain. So your mind in classical neuroscience is considered to be a function of the brain. Nothing to do with the body, nothing to do with interpersonal relationships, nothing to do with the universe. Just
yeah. It's kind of isolated in that dome. Yeah.
Now, when very often, again, neuroscientists, of that ilk, so to speak, they will consider mind and a function of the brain, just like urine, for example, is a function of the kidneys. But there's a huge difference, as I'm sure you and all our listeners can appreciate, between urine and the mind. Urine you can measure, you can see, you can smell. Mind you cannot. It's an energetic phenomenon. It is not material. And therefore to have it follow Newtonian classical physics just doesn't work.
Yeah, I agree. And as you're bringing this up, and as the book, and you can extrapolate on this, but I just thought of the conversation that Jung points to in his book, Memory, Dreams, and Reflections with, I think, a Hopi or a Navajo tribes person who says, "You Westerners are crazy. You think up here, we think here," and he points to his heart. So it was this kind of, I think, language and culture and perspective or presuppositions that the mind takes will have more of an emphasis, a psychogenic, if you will, emphasis on different organs as being the center of the person's mind or being.
Yes, and you mentioned the heart, and so one of my chapters in the Embodied Mind is on heart transplants. And is it possible to get personality transplants by way of heart transplants? And it is. And there have been many reports on that. And the only way you can explain that, and we can go into more detail if you like.
Yeah.
The only way that there could be personality changes in the recipient, which in some ways relate to the personality of the donor, is by cellular transference of memory, because that new heart, of course, contains millions of cells, and some of those cells are actually, about 40,000 of those cells have already been tagged as memory cells, actual memory cells. Wow. So that some aspect of the donor is being transferred. And some recipients, it's just like most of us, some of us have musical talents. Some of us have, other talents. But the same thing happens to recipients. Some people are more sensitive to these new cells coming in, and others are not. But of course, one of the problems, like I spoke to a heart transplant surgeon the other day, and I said, do you ever tell your patients that they may have some changes in personality as a result of receiving a heart of a stranger. And he said, oh no, I would never say that. So, there's a lot of resistance.
What would be an interesting study is if you gave somebody a battery of personality tests before, pre-op and post-op, 6 months maybe, just to see if anything's changed. How could you attribute that to the cellular memory, or is it some sort of shift in such a huge event on a person's life? But still, would be interesting to see.
I totally agree with you. I would love to see that study. At the moment, most most doctors working in that area attribute any changes just to what you just described, the operation, the surgery, the anesthetic, the drugs that they're on. But that does not.
Statistically, I think a psychometrician would probably say, statistically, that's, if it falls like so many standard deviations out of a before, if it goes astronomically high, let's say on openness to experiencing and on a neo-PI, and prior to the operation, the person was more neurotic and less open, like there's something going on there besides, I guess you could, at any rate, we could speculate how you could design a study like that, but it would be interesting.
That would be very interesting. And I hope that perhaps one of our listeners will do that. Who knows? Yeah.
Yeah.
So, heart transplants are an interesting area where my core concept, of cellular memory really comes to the fore.
Okay. Yeah, it does. Talk a little bit more about that. I mean, you said heart transplants, but I know that having doing biofeedback, and especially heart rate variability oriented biofeedback, I know some of the literature on the communicative ability of the heart to the brain and other organs, and the speed at which it sends its impulses to the brain versus the brain to the heart, and the electromagnetic sphere. Maybe you can go into a little bit of that too, about the importance, I guess, magnetically or systemically of the heart, and besides just being a pump.
Exactly. I mean, this is what, medical students are taught in medical school, that heart is a pump and how to keep it functioning, and, how atherosclerosis and other things of that nature can affect it. But it's much more than a pump, and if you look sort of at folk wisdom, all the sayings about the heart, that exist in our society. The heart has its reasons that the brain knows nothing about, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Or she died of a broken heart, or we have this heart-to-heart connection. I mean, people talk about that all the time.
Yes.
And there's a reason for that. And the heart definitely has a huge electromagnetic force, which I think, I would have to go back to my book to remember it, but I think it's 5,000 times stronger than the electromagnetic field that the brain produces.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah,
something like that. So that when people really have a heart-to-heart connection, I think that's when the wavelengths are the same, and so they are in sync. And when people are in sync, they can work better. They like each other better. They fall in love sometimes. And the opposite can also happen. When somebody's heart is not synchronizing with yours, you might feel hostile, aggressive, because it's just not happening. The other thing that I would like to mention for a moment, because it's so important, if it's okay with you, is the importance of the gut bacteria.
Yes, absolutely. The microbiome.
Yes, the microbiome. Everywhere I go nowadays, by this I mean everything that I read, everything, because we don't go very far nowadays with COVID. But everything that I read, almost every day, there is something, that tells us the incredible importance of the gut microbiome, Just to give you an example, for example, it has been shown that people who live more isolated lives have a much more limited microbiome, whereas people, particularly older people who have many relationships, have a much more diverse microbiome. It is not clear at the moment which comes first. Is it the isolation which produces a less diverse microbiome, or is it a limited microbiome which makes a person act more withdrawn and isolated? We don't know. But the important thing is that we have to start thinking of the body of not only of top-down communication, which is the old brain communication, but also the bottom up. You know, how does the microbiome affect how your brain is functioning? Okay?
Yeah.
That is sort of the emphasis that I'm trying to bring to this conversation, and also the conversation that we need to have with pharmacological companies, with medical doctors. For example, just to continue, there are antidepressants, as you well know, and anti-anxiety drugs, which work in some people and not with others. And it has never been clear why that should be so. But lately, we are discovering that the microbiome has a lot to do with that there are certain bacteria which destroy antidepressants or anti-anxiety drugs, so they cannot work. It's not the fault of the drug, so to speak. It's your microbiome. And hopefully one day, and I can give you lots and lots of references for that, hopefully one day people, like before a doctor prescribes a medication, they will look at the microbiome and it will tell them which drugs will work and which will be ineffective. The same thing has been recently shown with statins. As you know, millions of Americans and Canadians and people all over the world take statins in order to lower their cholesterol, right? Well, it has been shown that certain bacteria destroy statins and they cannot work. And people don't know.
Yeah.
Your doctor, the chances are that your family physician has no idea about that. And yet it's in the literature, but it is still not widely known. So again, you know, the whole idea of bottom up has to become more prominent in our culture.
Well, it sounds more like there's a conversation going on between all of your organs, your cells that store memory and also create your sense of self. It's a plethora, or a kind of feeds into the idea of polypsychic versus unipsychic functioning of the human.
Beautifully expressed. Beautiful. Yes, totally.
Yeah. Although many people in the audience might not understand the idea of uni versus polypsychic, it is kind of why people come into a psychiatrist or a counselor, a social worker, or a psychologist's office. Is this a lot of this kind of inner turmoil or conflict that you're working through? Probably 99% of what's going on I would venture, in a consulting room is about that. But yes, it is that kind of conversation. Maybe we can move back a little bit more to, I guess, perinatal experiences and kind of unfold that a little bit more.
Well, because people, by this I mean scientists, doctors, obstetricians, people dealing with pregnant women, more or less focused on birth and the events following birth, and very little attention, except in the most primitive way, like blood pressure, nutrition, was paid to the 9 months of pregnancy. But over over the last 30 years or so, I would say, it has become very clear that everything that the pregnant woman eats, drinks, inhales, experiences, all of those things will have an effect on her unborn child. And so particularly stress hormones, for example, have a very, very negative effect. And it has been shown that if there is too much stress hormone, cortisone, adrenaline, noradrenaline, all those other catecholamines, all those stress hormones, they will directly affect the formation of brain circuits. And the same thing happens with tobacco smoke, nicotine. The same thing happens with recreational drugs, including cannabis. They are, a long time ago, when I attended medical school, we were taught that bad substances don't get through the brain-blood barrier. There was such a thing as the brain-blood barrier, and all these things that I've just mentioned, oh no, they are kept out. Well, they are not. They're not. They go right through. And so what happens is, if you have small concentration, let's say, of stress hormones, it will destroy some neurons. But if the pregnant woman, excuse me, if the pregnant woman is under a lot of stress, either acute stress, let's say she finds out that her husband has passed away, or if she is under chronic stress, which could be that she's a 16-year-old single girl and doesn't know who the father of the child is, and doesn't know whether she should go through with the pregnancy or should have an abortion, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. This is going to produce chronic stress. In either case, there is too much stress hormone in her blood system, which goes to the brain, which then through the umbilical circulation enters the placenta, and from the placenta it goes to the baby. And so it will directly kill new neurons in the brain of that baby. So the more neurons are killed, of course, the more it will affect the brain circuits. So when that child is born, it will actually be born with wrong brain circuits. Those brain circuits will not be healthy. They will not be the way they were genetically meant to develop. So that child, physically speaking now, I'm not talking psychology, just in terms of the actual hard wiring of the brain, right? The hard wiring of the brain is going to be defective. So naturally, that will produce emotional problems of all kinds.
So this might be a precursor to, let's say, an anxious temperament in a baby.
Sure.
Which, if the mother's already experiencing anxiety, could cause difficulties with attachment in that infant.
Yes. It could also change the autonomic nervous system functioning
to more cortisol or sympathetic. Yeah. Yeah.
So depending which way things work, and also, like you said, also depending on the emotional state of the mother. If the mother is depressed, she will communicate less to the unborn child. And so, you mentioned bonding. Bonding does not start at birth. Bonding starts at conception. The mother and hopefully the father of the child communicate all the time with the child, not just verbally, but in terms of motion. Like, mothers sometimes stroke their abdomen. Mm-hmm. Mothers sometimes sing to the baby, talk to the baby. I met a woman reporter in California the other day, and we were talking like we are here now. And she said, well, during my first pregnancy, my husband was an intern, and he was hardly ever home. During my second pregnancy, he graduated, he was home every night, and he would talk to my unborn child, to my baby. I said, "What did he say?" And she said, "Oh, well, he would just say about the weather. We are having a nice sunny day today, and we just finished having dinner, and we'll watch a little bit of television, then we'll go to sleep. And I hope you are well, Junior." And he always addressed the baby as Junior. When this baby was born, my husband, this woman continued, my husband walked over to me after the doctor has put the baby on my chest, and he sort of lifted his hand and he said, "Hi, Junior." And the little boy just kind of looked at him and gave him this amazing smile of recognition. This woman tells me that there was simply no doubt that this baby recognized the father. And P.S., the important thing is that this child's relationship to the father is so much better than the firstborn, who does not have quite this relation.
Yeah. Well, the wheels in my head are spinning a bit here. In this country, of course, we're going through, I don't know when we ever stop going through these dichotomous turmoil in the United States. But of course, there's the argument over abortion rights and whatnot. And certainly, I'm sure a lot of people have, I'm assuming they have a lot of people read your book and then changed their mind about how pregnancy should be treated or when life begins. And obviously, you're not taking a political stance here. You're just using circumstantial and other evidence, hard evidence.
Yeah, hard evidence, yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely hard evidence, yes. Yes, and again, once you expressed it perfectly. I'm not taking a political stance. I'm just saying, ladies and gentlemen, this is what science tells us. The rest is up to you.
Exactly. Yeah.
How you want to live, how you want to, control your body, etc., etc. But I think it's very, very important for people also in terms, coming back to my book, The Embodied Mind, if I may mention it. Mm-hmm. Really important also to realize that the egg, the ovum, as we say in medicine, and the sperm also carry memories. And so the egg and the ovum will carry memories from the mother, and the sperm, of course, from the father. And so it certainly carries data. Perhaps memories is a little bit exaggerated, perhaps not totally correct, perhaps not totally right. But certainly information, data about, for example, the health of the mother in the ovum, or in the sperm. If the father was a smoker, it will carry that information in the sperm, and that will affect the eventual health of that baby. So I think it's very important for people, young people who are thinking of starting a family, to really start living well before conception. Because if you don't, your sperm and ova may have a negative effect on your child.
Yeah. Is there a way at what point to stop ingesting tobacco, or is there? I mean, because obviously it's going to have effect on you if you start smoking at 17, and is it carry over later on?
Yes. Well, I think the sooner you stop, the better for your own health. Not even.
Oh yeah.
In terms of the child, right? I mean. Yeah. There is a definite connection between cancer, especially cancer of the lung, and smoking. And, the same thing applies to, cannabis and all that other stuff that people do. which is very, very unhealthy, both for your body and the body of the future child. So, and again, it takes us back to cellular memory and the fact that cells contain memories. And particularly when they work together in tissues, when they are connected, millions and millions of cells form a network. And we know the power of networks from the internet, right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And well, it's also kind of belies a sense of like how maybe transgenerational memories of trauma or other memories are passed on.
Yes. And of course, that takes us, for example, to what's going on in Ukraine, right? I mean, thousands and thousands and thousands of people are being dispossessed. They are being bombed day and night. What effect will this have on the children to be still conceived, and also on the children, of course, who are already living there? What effect will this have? Well, it's not going to be a good one, I can assure you.
Yeah. Well, you're kind of pointing to an overarching theme of symbiosis between all of us and everything.
Yes, very much so. Yes. One of the things that we have learned from genetics is that everything is connected.
Yes.
Is connected.
Yeah.
And, at one time, like Time magazine, for example, had a cover which was called The God Gene. Do we have a God gene? I remember that about 20 years ago, something like that. And then at some point, they also had a cover about the IQ gene. Well, there is no God gene. There is no IQ gene. We have something like 26,000 genes. And you cannot change the genes themselves, as you know. You can only change their expression. So you can activate genes and you can deactivate, put them to sleep, so to speak. And so this is what has led to the new science of epigenetics, because for a long time, geneticists thought that once you have your genes, from conception on, everything is written in stone. Nothing can be changed. And, so you have blue eyes and nobody can change that. Well, that's true. But certainly in terms of temperament and other things, musical abilities, all of those things, it just depends whether that particular combination of genes is activated or not. So most of our genome really consists of switches. In terms of biology, we call them methyl groups and acetyl groups. But acetyl groups turn down a gene, methyl groups turn them up. And so it is a combination of these switches that make you who you are. And if you are, for example, exposed to toxins in the air, it will turn certain genes off that protect you, and you are more likely to develop cancer. But everything is connected. And so if you were even, some geneticists are talking about perhaps changing a gene or getting rid of a gene, but that's very, very dangerous because each gene controls many more other genes. And so the moment you change one, God knows what's going to change in your body. We have no idea.
Yeah, that sounds like playing dice with a person's inner universe. Yeah,
exactly. Yes.
Your book goes on to talk about various interesting theories of like neuronal memory, like Candel's synapse versus neuronal function, and cytoskeletons, or the glial cell being the owner of the memories, or where the mind lives, and also more quantum biology theories like Stuart Hameroff and Roger Primrose's ideas. Maybe I've opened up that Pandora's box. I'll let you play with those monsters for a second here.
Okay, we are getting into a very complex area, I have to say.
Yeah.
And,
but fun. Yeah.
Oh, fun, definitely, yes. Um, Obviously, I'm a psychiatrist. I'm not a quantum physicist. And I studied it very, very thoroughly because, as we said today at some point, the mind has to be more than material. But how do you explain that? How do you explain that? So, I grappled with it. I struggled with it. And it took me into the quantum mechanics and quantum biology field. And like one of the phenomena, for example, where the mind and quantum mechanics meet is in one of the primary core observations of quantum mechanics, which is that the presence of an observer influences the outcome of the experiment.
Correct.
That has been proven like 1,000 times or more. So how is that possible? And the only way that can be explained at the moment, perhaps tomorrow we'll have a better explanation, but at the moment, the best scientific evidence seems to indicate that somehow the mind of the observer affects whether those particles will change into waves or wavicles, or whether they will remain particles, whether waves will change back into particles. All those things will be affected by the mind of the observer. So then we can go into other areas. For example, we have all heard about twins, for example, or people who have been very close. But let's take twins. Twins could be 1,000 miles away from each other. And at one point, suddenly one of them feels a great deal of anxiety and just has this thought that his twin, who lives thousands of miles away, is in trouble. And half an hour later, perhaps, he gets a phone call from the twin's partner saying that your brother was just involved in a car accident and he's dying and he's at this and this hospital and come and visit. Now, how does that happen? So one of the things that we know about quantum mechanics is that there is this connection between two particles that at one point were one. And the name given to that, it's called superposition. And so these particles then are connected forever, even if they are thousands of miles away. Einstein was no great friend of quantum mechanics, and he talked about crazy position at a distance. Something
spooky. I think is what we call. Yeah.
That's it. You got it. Yes.
Yeah.
So the same thing I think happens, that when people have been very close together, somehow they are able to communicate. So we know about the spooky action at a distance, the superposition, that these two particles will forever be connected. And so when you change the position of one, the position of the other one instantly changes. Instantly. Although, according to Einstein again, the fastest communication is as fast. Nothing can be faster than the speed of light, according to Newtonian, classical, and Einsteinian physics. But actually, this is instantaneous. It's faster. It's faster than the speed of light.
It's like the shortest distance between 2 points is no distance at all.
Exactly. Exactly.
They are the same. Yeah, they're bound together. Yeah,
Miles apart.
yeah.
So again, we are coming into an area that we just don't have good explanations for. And so that takes me, back to the mind, that we have to allow for explanations which are beyond the boundaries of classical mechanistic physics. And quantum biology is, I think, the best approach to that.
Okay, maybe you can go into describing that a little bit, like Hameroff's theory and Primrose's backing up of that, if you feel comfortable doing so.
Well, not totally, but I will.
It is well laid out in the book, and I've heard Primrose and he's and Hameroff before speak about this.
Yeah. Well, Hameroff, I think he's still alive. He's an anesthetist, and he got into this because anesthetists always worry about consciousness. Is the patient really asleep? And if he is, quote unquote, asleep, how much does he actually receive? How much cognition is there while he is under anesthesia? So anesthetists actually have been sort of at the forefront, besides philosophers, to look into consciousness. And we know from their studies that although the person may not feel any pain and may not remember what happened during the surgery while they were under an anesthetic, if a surgeon were suddenly to say, "Whoops, I think I just cut into his aorta," the patient would panic. You would immediately see, the blood pressure going through the roof. You would see all kinds of changes, which would indicate that he did receive the message, although he was asleep. So Hameroff and Primrose, as you mentioned, have come to the conclusion that it is the microtubules, which are tiny little structures in a cell, which seem to be the source of consciousness in humans. I don't know whether this is true or not. The human cell, as any cell, is a very, very complex apparatus. And there are scientists such as Dr. Bruce Lipton. Have you ever interviewed Lipton?
I have not interviewed him. I'd be delighted to have him on. I think he'd be a really intriguing guest. Yeah.
Wonderful. He's wonderful. And very enthusiastic.
Yes, he is. I've enjoyed his lectures, and yeah.
He's a wonderful human being, truly. So anyway, Bruce Lipton is one of the geneticists who has pointed out that it is the cellular membrane, which is sort of the brain of the cell. And the cellular membrane acts as sort of the depository of memories for the cell. Other people, of course, have pointed out to the nucleus with the DNA and the RNA as containing a lot of information. In my book, I point out that although the human cell is impossible to see with the naked eye, it contains 12,000 proteins. It contains DNA and RNA. If the DNA were to be put lengthwise, tail to head, it would take up something like 3 meters. And yet it is in a tiny cell, so small that you can't see it with your eye. The only cell that's actually visible to the naked eye is the egg cell, the ovum, which is as large as a dot on a printed page. So in this incredibly small area, you have, again, an incredibly large amount of information. And so it is not inconceivable that a cell can contain at least some fragments of information about everything that goes on in the world and in our bodies. And when they all work together, of course, you get kind of a holographic idea of the memory. So,
yeah, well, I think it was Carl Pribram who came up with that idea, right? The holographic mind or universe, right? Yeah.
Yes. So, in terms of cell structure, there are many sort of theories on where, in the cell, like the microtubules that you mentioned, consciousness, memory, the mind, all of those things could be contained. But I think that the best we can say at the moment is that it's in there somewhere.
Well, what is this like as a clinical psychologist or you're a psychiatrist? What do you think all of this information is? What kind of conclusion can we draw from it? Even though, science never meets a conclusion, it's not supposed to come to an end product necessarily. What do you think this means for us as clinicians? What do you think it means for doctors? What do you think it means for the people who aren't in the healing or helping professions?
Yes. Well, I think that there are two sort of directions in which we can go. In terms of psychotherapists, psychologists, psychiatrists, social workers, anyone who is trying to help another human being struggling with anxiety, depression, relationships, the meaning of life, things of that nature. I think what for those people, the people helpers, the mental health professionals, if you like, I think it's important to emphasize that going back to Greek times, a healthy mind in a healthy body, that you cannot separate anxiety, depression, et cetera, from the body, okay? To treat it as if it was just like some kind of a mental phenomena is a mistake. You have to treat the whole person, and really the whole person, Many, many years ago, the concept of psychosomatic medicine was introduced, but it's really, it's just words. It's in some ways a very empty concept. Mm-hmm. I attended Harvard University, and I get the Harvard Health newsletter every week. And so, for example, they were describing the fact that we need to look at ulcers in terms of the stress that a person is experiencing and the stress, the stress hormones that are being passed from the brain to the gut, and how that is creating ulcers. And where's psychosomatics? It's all about, your mind just destroying your body, essentially, with stress or anxiety. It doesn't say anything about how the body is affecting the brain. So that, for example, good nutrition will make a huge difference. Having a healthy gut microbiome will make a difference, as we talked very briefly, in terms of, let's say, antidepressants not working on some people because they got the wrong bacteria. So when you, other people deal with people, for example, who are depressed, it would be very important to also ask about their diet. Are you exercising? Okay. It's not just, Freudian psychoanalytics, which I don't put down, but it's limited. It's not just about, your mother and your father and how you hate your brothers, but it's also how you live your life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think it was Milton Erickson said that change will lead to insight faster than insight will lead to change.
I never heard that before. I love that.
I think you're right. One of the go-to interventions for someone who's depressed is to try to see how open they are to walking or exercising, and that tends to lift mood. Yes. Right? Yeah. It can certainly help.
And the more, and people who are depressed, of course, isolate themselves, and that's not good either, because you're not getting interpersonal relationships, you're not getting the energy from another person, you're not talking the way you and I are exchanging energies. So all of that is important. And in terms of the other side, okay, just to answer that question completely, I think it would be incredibly important for pharmaceutical companies, for example, and neuroscientists to look at the whole body and how the body affects the brain. For example, Alzheimer's disease, okay? It's the thing that all of us, you're too young, but I certainly am not. And so every person I know over the age of 65, the moment they forget where they put their keys, they start worrying, oh my God, is this the first sign of Alzheimer's? Now, everybody knows that amyloid plaques are sort of the thing that creates Alzheimer's. That's what everybody believes. Nobody is quite sure how they are formed, but be that as it may. Well, interestingly enough, scientists in Australia at a university, a small university, I forgot the name, in Australia have discovered that actually the liver produces amyloid plaques. The amyloid plaques from the liver then go to the brain. Now, instead of trying to treat amyloid plaques in the brain, which is what all the pharmaceutical companies are out trying to discover and make $1 million, have a look at the liver. Why is the liver producing amyloid plaques? How can you stop that? How can you interfere with the journey of the amyloid plaques from the liver to the brain? All of that could prevent Alzheimer's disease in someone who perhaps, for example, has a genetic predisposition to Alzheimer's, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I there's so many. We're so, I guess, focused on one area of the body at a time that having a holistic approach is where these leads of information are taking us. I almost see like you need to have proper health. You need to have a psychologist, a psychiatrist, some kind of a psychotherapist on board with doctors, talking holistically about a patient and what they're, instead of having all these specific areas of interest, like everything's become so specialized in medicine.
We need sort of multi-faculty training institutions, where people like you and nutritionists and lung specialists and cardiologists and all of them could meet at least once a month or something and communicate with each other about what's going on in their fields and how that may impact your field or my field, etc.
Yeah, exactly. Needs to be more communication across fields.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, any other thoughts you might want to add to your discussion of these ideas?
Well, thank you. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak about this. Obviously, I care a lot about this area. I think it's terribly important for humanity to become aware of you mentioned the word symbiosis. The mutuality of our bodies and our brains. Our brains are not separate from our bodies. That is my main message, really. Okay, start connecting the dots. Okay, start thinking of your body. Every part of your body is important. And the other thing that we did not mention yet, and I'm sure that it's one of your interests, is the fact that a lot of trauma is also buried, baked into some tissues in our cells.
Yes.
And so if that is the case with, one of the people, let's say, who's listening, or one of your patients or one of my patients, it's important to also work with the body in terms of trying to uncover that trauma and get it out of your tissues, so that once you get it out of your tissues, you really get it out of your mind. It's the only way to get that trauma out of your mind is by getting it out of the body.
Yes. Okay. Well, on that note, we will end this conversation. Dr. Verny, you're more than welcome to come back anytime. I really enjoyed our conversation. The book is The Embodied Mind, Understanding the Mysteries of Cellular Memory, Consciousness and Our Bodies. And I suppose that's available brick and mortar stores and on Amazon and elsewhere. You did mention you have a podcast you're starting up. I mentioned, it's the ham radio of the 2020s. Like everyone has a podcast. I was joking with the person at Trader Joe's today. You must have I'm going to be interviewing somebody tonight. You have a podcast? Everyone has a podcast.
Called Pushing Boundaries with Dr. Tom Verny.
Pushing Boundaries. And that's available Apple Podcasts, elsewhere. Yeah.
All the usual sources. Yeah.
Okay. Excellent. We will have links for that, the book, your website, in the show notes.
Great.
Okay,
Thank you. It was a real pleasure.
Oh, thank you. Have a great weekend.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to the Psychology Talk podcast. Did you know you can find us on the web all over the place? Well, maybe not all over the place, but you can find us on Instagram, you can find us on Facebook, you can find us at Spreaker, Stitcher, Apple Podcasts, loads of places. Please look for us, and if you can, subscribe, like us, leave us a review, send us a comment, a criticism. Hey, we like to hear a lot from people. Go ahead, talk to us. That's why we're here. By the way, this is just a reminder to let you know that all of the material here is for entertainment and informative purposes only. If you do need a therapist or a mental health professional, please seek one out. Music is provided by the band Serenati.